Welcome to Going Dark, a podcast about Netflix's sci-fi series, Dark. I'm Dan.
I'm Olga, and today we're discussing Season 1, Episode 6, entitled Sic Mundus Creatus Est.
Ooh, Latin.
Took 1 year of it in high school.
I took one semester of it in college, and it didn't go well.
Mine went fine, but I don't remember anything except vaca means cow. No, baka means cow. That might be wrong. That's not helpful to us in either direction here. But
what does this title mean?
It means thus the world was created.
Ooh.
Yes.
We'll get back to that. What did you think of this episode?
It was a really great episode. I think it kept the ball rolling from episode 5, which was, one of the high points of the season. I'm really on board with the mystery. I'm on board with, I guess, like the true ensemble nature of it. I was a little bummed that we didn't get more flashbacks to the past this episode, but it was kind of nice to focus on, the adult world.
And it just because we didn't get that many, flashbacks to it, it was still present in the story as far as what's going on with Regina and Ulrich.
Yeah, I was so surprised that, after us finding out about Hannah being the one who, falsified the rape report in the previous episode, that, Ulrich would find that out in this episode.
Yeah. So are we not going to see the fallout of that in the past necessarily? Like, it almost seems like not super necessary, but I also want to see it. So, I don't know. Interesting.
Yeah.
I really like this one. I think that we're definitely in the zone now where things are occurring, and it's not just like, teasing us. It's actually giving us something to chew on, both as a character piece. Definitely a lot of drama happening in this episode.
Yeah.
And as a, plot movement, mythological stuff. It was definitely one of the ones. I'm definitely in that zone now where I finish an episode and I'm like, I have to wait a week to watch the next one. And it's not like the world stopping me. It's my own self.
Your own folly.
What am I doing?
I know. What was it? After we finished the rewatch for episode 6, I was like, let's just keep going. Like, podcast, yeah, but also let's do it. We didn't.
We did not.
But I was disappointed in us.
I often am. Okay, before we get into the recap, there are a few pieces of housekeeping that I meant to get to. One is, this is both an audio podcast and a video podcast. So if you want to see our faces, you can do so at youtube.com/doingok. Olga, in particular, likes to look at me like I'm a crazy person. People enjoy that sometimes. Also,
it's a constant in our feedback section or in our comments. Yes.
And we also are on audio services. So if I'm not on a service that you look us up, let me know at Doing Okay Video on the Twitter. And also, this video is 1 day late. I apologize for that. Work life got in the way. This is not our full-time gig, believe it or not. Crazy.
I don't think our view count,
justifies that.
Yeah, exactly. It would be great if it did, but.
And the last piece of housekeeping I want to mention is this will be our last episode for December. We're going to take a few weeks off for holiday breakish time. We will be back the first Tuesday of January. Let us get into the recap.
Cap.
All right, so quick cap time it is. I'm doing this off the cuff. We watched the episode yesterday, so now usually we watch the episode and immediately record, so this is going to be interesting. I'm starting with...
Interesting's a word.
All right, so I'm going to start with Katarina. Katarina is none too happy.
What is the greater Boston German regional accent?
So Katarina, this is her first, I would say, like really big episode. She starts it, she's sad, and her two kids, Magnus and Marta, are wanting to leave to go to school, and she is not happy about this. She's like, what are you doing? Your brother's only been gone a few days. Like, why are you leaving? And Marta is like, you can't just like keep us locked in here forever. And, we know that like life has to go on. I'm in the play. They're counting on me. And they have a bit of a fight. And Marta basically is like, look, he's obviously dead. Like, Mikkel's gone. get over it. No, she doesn't say get over, but you get there's
move,
a big
move on.
yeah,
Life
like
goes on.
like accept it
Yeah.
basically. And Katarina slaps her and it's like it's not all about you. And Magnus like holds his mom as Marta runs away, and it's a big dramatic moment, and one which I would say is, in my opinion, the weakest part of the episode.
I'm incredibly confused by this scene.
Yeah. So, do you want to sort of run down what our issues are?
Yeah. So the main one is that it seems like, oh, Katarina's been demanding like their presence by her side. This idea of you can't leave, like where are you going, is so strange because in the previous episode, it was so Marta and Magnus focused with their like misadventures. So we still saw Marta at rehearsal.
Yeah. We've seen Magnus go banging babes, you know.
Yeah, Franziska, stalk Franziska.
Yeah.
So, like, obviously, Katarina has not been, you know, on top of their comings and goings.
Yeah.
So, on the one hand, her being like, where are you going right now, doesn't really make sense as an outburst.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, Marta's response of, you can't keep us locked in here.
Well, and also
doesn't
she's
make
like,
sense.
she's also like, you don't even care about us. Like you're just in your own head too. Like you haven't even thought about how we feel. And it's like a few episodes ago, wasn't what we saw was Katarina like reassuring and holding Marta. So
Yeah.
like a lot of, even though I think the performances are good here,
Yes.
and if you just take what they say as fact and don't look at the last couple episodes, it's a good scene of drama.
Right.
And of Marta, you know, unleashing and saying like he's probably gone, and Katarina not being able to handle that, and them both, you know, being sort of right and sort of wrong in their own different ways. It feels weird for a show that is so continuity driven
Yeah.
that I don't feel like what they're telling me is what they showed me.
Yeah. It was a weird, unfortunate way, in my opinion, to start the episode, to just leave me going like, what are you talking about? It makes, you know, the stuff that we're sitting there like contemplating and putting a lot of effort into like noting not make a lot of sense if they're like undoing small bits here and there.
Yeah. But again, it's a minor thing.
It
and I
is.
think the rest of the
Yeah.
episode more than makes up for it. All right. So continuing with Katarina's story, basically she goes around, she puts up posters of Mikkel, and then she comes home, she looks through her mail, she sees Ulrich's phone bill and correspondence with a mystery number, which she calls, and it's Hannah, which, you know, confirms her worst suspicions about the affair on Showtime. And she doesn't end up confronting either of them in this episode, which I thought was really interesting because her emotions go somewhere else, which we'll get to in a moment.
Somewhere more irresponsible.
Yes. So she then is waiting for Marta, waiting to go to the play. She's in the car, she's listening to the radio, and they're talking about the missing children. And she calls in and is basically like, this world is a festering wound, and I am Rorschach, and everyone will die, and they're all awful, and you never know who's around the corner. And stuff like that.
Yeah.
Good?
Yeah. It was very supervillain like, which, you know, was an interesting turn. I wasn't expecting this kind of
You thought-
monologue from her, I guess.
I wouldn't have called it super villain like. I think it's
Okay.
just cynical and angry and
Is that
yeah.
not a trait
Well, yeah,
we
but
associate?
understandably
when you use
so.
that voice and then, you know, attribute it to Rorschach, not that he's a villain,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean. Yeah, it is not like a cheerful, I am an educator, high school principal kind of speech.
So, speaking of the high school, she then goes to the play. Marta is killing it as Ariadne. And she is basically doing this whole monologue about death and how at the end we're all alone, everybody dies, and the only judge we have is ourselves. And it's this whole, you know, intense thing about death. And so she breaks down. And Katarina goes and you know, holds her and takes her away. I thought it was a very nice way of sort of wrapping up the emotion of earlier and tying them together without even having to have a discussion about it.
Exactly. It's just Marta isn't actually as callous as she seems. She's just processing her grief and her fear and her emotion in a different way.
Yeah.
And then Katarina, and the way Katarina is doing it is was very like go, go, go focused.
Yep.
And then she breaks down. Like it was just them coming together. It was really nice, like show, not tell, using their time and their kind of like various threads economically, but impactfully.
Their various threads, you say.
Yes. That was on purpose.
So as she's taking Marta home, as they're leaving the building, they run into Regina. And she's basically like, oh, I heard your amazing performance on the radio. If you hate us so much, why don't you just leave? So that is the straw that breaks the camel's back. Katerina has had it, and she smacks her down, and she is beating her up, opening the whoop-ass can, as they say. And it's, Magnus is like, whoa, mama.
Everyone's just, all the teenagers are just standing there staring at their moms beat each other up. And they're looking at each other and they're looking at that. And no one's doing anything as these grown women smack each other around. Katerina mostly doing the smacking. And it was like, I don't know. I found this scene pretty off-putting. But I think in part, mostly actually, because we were also following Regina's like story.
Yeah.
So I had more sympathy for Regina this episode. I mean, obviously I'm sympathetic towards Katerina and that Mikkel is missing. But it didn't seem like fair to me in this moment. Not that what Regina was saying like was okay. Nice either.
Yeah.
But...
So the quick story we should just say. So Regina has real reasons to be upset with Katerina, which we'll get to in a second. And Katerina has mistreated her in the past. Katerina falsely thinks that Regina got her revenge, but didn't. So they just generally don't like each other. I think it's a very interesting scene. And in general, the show does a great job of making everybody sort of unlikable, but not totally, but like also sort of sympathetic.
Very
like,
human.
Yeah. So like, I'm not mad at Katerina personally. Like,
right.
I feel like, yeah, her emotion boiled over onto the wrong person. But I'm also like, Regina, like this stuff happened to you 30 years ago. Her kid is missing. Is it really necessary to like, as she's shepherding her crying daughter out of the high school, to like make a snarky comment? Like, I don't. To me, I'm not particularly sympathetic of Regina in this moment, but I also am like, well, that doesn't mean that Katerina did the right thing. I just think that they're equally bleh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of bad blood there.
Yeah. I'm going to knock out maybe the rest of Marta real quick. So Marta also interacts with Bartosz a little bit in this episode. The first time where he actually like sees her since everything happened. It's mostly just awkward.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot to report on here. He mentions that Jonas stood him up, and then I think she definitely notices that Jonas isn't there to play. We'll see if they end up thinking he's gone for good. We'll get to that. And then Marta has a very nice moment, I think, at the end with Magnus, where they're sort of just brother-sister, bonding.
Yeah. A little snarky towards each other, but, they get each other's pain, and it's a really interesting thing of not really knowing your parents and not really knowing anyone.
And the thing about how like that's a very relatable, like normal conversation to have, but also has extra meaning in this show where they could know their teenage parents, and their friend currently is meeting his teenage mother. So interesting stuff there.
It's a lot of double meaning, a lot of tripping through time.
Tripping through time. So let's go over to Regina. Regina starts the episode in the past, and she is, her teenage self. She's tied to a tree. Ulrich and Katerina played a prank on her, I guess. It's a little unclear on like exactly what they did, why the point is she's in the forest in the dead of night, tied to a tree, freaked out, traumatized. She wakes up now 33 years later, clearly still traumatized from that. Her husband is Alexander, the head of the power plant, which I don't know if we knew before this episode. I certainly hadn't like processed it before this episode.
It might have been one of those things that we could have realized retroactively, but didn't.
And basically throughout the episode, she gets mammogram information. She finds out she has cancer. She tries to call her husband. He doesn't pick up. Later on, he like finds out on his own, tries to connect with her. They have like sort of like they don't really end up talking about it like in specifics in this episode, but they're both sort of obviously overwhelmed by it.
Dancing around it, not wanting. It's that thing of like compartmentalizing. Like, I want you to know that I'm here for you when you're ready.
Yeah.
And she's not ready, and she's not ready. And then, it boils over for her too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the middle of all this, she interacts with Ulrich, which I'm going to now backpedal and talk to you about Ulrich. And Ulrich is trying to look into what happened with Mads back in the day to see if there's any connection to now. So he looks and he listens to an old interview where his mom says that his dad was with them when Mads disappeared. Ulrich knows that's not true. So he goes and he visits his parents and goes after his dad. It's like, where were you on the night of the 5th? And he's very violent. It's a very violent episode.
It's an angry episode.
Everybody's, Hannah's slapping people, Katarina's slapping her daughter and then punching people. Ulrich is grabbing people by the throat and by the face. There's a lot of physicality.
It's a hands-on episode.
It is a hands-on episode. But basically, the mom covers for him again, which is interesting because we know he was gone for when Mikkel was gone too. But she tells Ulrich that he was gone that night, but he was sleeping with Claudia Tiedemann. And on speaking of the Tiedemans, Regina was the last one to see Mads alive. So, bringing us back to the epic confrontation between Regina and Ulrich. So Ulrich comes to her, is like, yo, what was up with that Mads boy? And she was like, he was great. He was so good, you should have died. And he was like, wow, okay, well, you're not so great either. You told everybody that I raped Katarina, and I didn't. And I know it was you because Hannah told me so. And she's like, Hannah.
Little Hannah, who's been obsessed with you for 30 years.
Yeah, you believed her.
So the entire reason that Mads was with Regina that night was because he'd taken to walking her home. And Regina says something along the lines of, the only reason he was doing that was because of what you and Katarina did.
Yeah, which implies that the tying up of the tree thing happened before even Mads was taken.
Yeah.
Which then, because at first we were like, oh, did they tie her up because they thought she accused them of rape?
Yeah.
But no, now it's more that I feel like Hannah used her as a good fall guy because she would have a reason to be pissed at Ulrich.
Yeah.
And also they have the family connection of the Tiedemans.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting. So it seems like they just did this tree thing. I'm interested to get more information on it.
Yeah.
But basically, Ulrich leaves and he's like, well, maybe I'm the dick, but also I don't care. Hannah is the big dick. So he goes...
And Regina's still kind of a dick, just in general.
Well, I mean...
She's established being kind of self-involved in the first episode of like, no one's staying at my hotel while this kid is missing.
Yeah, I mean, she's just kind of a dick. Yeah, but comparatively, she has a reason to be a dick for the most part. Again, I think she could have held back when Katarina's son was missing. And also, you know what, even in general, if the Ulrich scene, like, I understand he's in the wrong for the most part, but also he lost his brother and now his son is missing. So
but he's accusing her of having to do something with her, with his brother's disappearance, and therefore maybe with her.
I didn't read it as him like accusing her of murdering Mads or something.
I don't think necessarily that, but he could have been accusing her of just withholding evidence because she doesn't like them.
He didn't grab her by the face, so
unlike other people,
he couldn't possibly have been accusing her. Speaking of people he grabs, he goes to Hannah and he is not happy with her. He's like, "You're a poison, a poison," and she's like, "Yeah,
but I love you."
And he's like, "Why did you do it?" And she's like, "'Cause I wanted you." He's like, "Oh, okay, I get it." And so
leave me the hell alone.
So he goes off. He's upset. And basically he's looking through old family photos and stuff, and he thinks back to a story that his mom told him earlier in the episode about a cut on Mad's chin, his chinny chin. And then he realizes that the boy who's dead is Mads, which I think is interesting because I mean, obviously that was my very first thought in the first episode as soon as we saw the body, but I had kind of written that off because of the fact that he didn't realize it was Mads for so long.
But it's also been 33. Like, why would that be Mads though? Like, you have to think, I guess, from his perspective, not as like a sci-fi show.
80 clothes and I don't know.
I mean, but it's not like Ulrich necessarily has that, like, what Mads wore to school today burned into his memory on the day he disappeared. Like, that's the thing. People, you don't notice the mundane stuff.
I understand in real life, sure, he didn't figure it out. But on a TV show, I am a little frustrated.
It was frustrating for us to be like, look, there's what turns out to be a Twix bar, like wrapper next to him. Oh my God. So that means it's my brother. Like, that doesn't, why would he realize, think that?
I know. I don't know.
I get it. We as viewers are like, that's got to be Mads. Yeah. And then at the end of episode 6, he's like, look, it's Mads. And we're like, we know. We didn't know you knew.
But at least, that's one person off the board for who the stranger could be, which then brings me back to, okay, is it Jonas? If it's not Jonas, the only other person that it seems like believably it could be would maybe be Bartosz. Maybe. But I'm running out of other humans unless there's just people we don't know yet.
It might be that, but I'm also in the Jonas camp.
Well, and so speaking of Jonas, we'll end out with Jonas's big journey this week, where he finally goes into the caves and actually succeeds at doing something. So he finds the changes to the map, the message that the stranger left him. He packs it all up and he's going to figure out what's what. And he finds the thread left behind, and he follows the thread, and he follows the radiation with the Geiger counter, and he finds this mystical door of craziness. And
it says Sigmundus Creatus Est on the door.
Yeah. And then he goes into the crawl space, and there's like 2 different directions, and he picks one, and then he ends up in the past, and he meets Mama Hannah.
It's kind of interesting that, we start the episode with Jonas asking Hannah, oh, what was Dad like when you met? And then he meets his mom, like the first thing he does when he's there. And his grandfather. So
very exciting, very interesting. How do you feel about this, like, weird, almost mystical cubbyhole of time?
Yeah. I saw it coming based on, the
amount of movement through the caves in
yes,
general.
But also even the stranger, like, going into Jonas's room to, like, write this on the map. I was like, oh, and just the fact that Mikkel through the caves, ended up somewhere.
Yeah.
I think that had something to do with the...
So he got kidnapped, maybe. Or the...
But he didn't know he got kidnapped?
He got knocked out. Yeah, or maybe
there's just a wave. So the thing was that when Jonas got, like, the wind blow, opens the door and the wind blows.
He, like,
maybe something like that happened without Mikkel realizing, or maybe just getting lost and turned around in that cave with the wind going as he exited. Yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense considering how much effort Jonas had to put into time traveling.
But we also know that in general things just kind of, it's almost like a tide, and things just kind of fall in and out because, like, it's unless we think someone specifically put Mads' body there, but I don't necessarily think that. I think that it's like he was maybe buried around there in the past, and then he floated through the time tunnel. It must be like some sort of black hole or some sort of sciencey bullshit thing.
But didn't we see one of the hooded guys dragging a body through the woods? That was Eric, but that to me doesn't lend credence to the things wash up. I think
you think someone brought him out?
Yeah.
But you think, like, all of those random candy bars and all of the stuff that we've seen has been dropped on purpose? I don't know that I think, especially because, like, Mikkel wasn't even that near the caves when he disappeared.
That's
Like, he wasn't in the cave, for one thing. So,
Yeah.
like, unless he got knocked out and dragged there, it seemed, I don't know. The point being, we don't know how it works yet. But
Right.
the important point being that, like, it was a little bit too lost when they moved the island for me.
right.
It was a little too, like, signifying mystical. Like, even the fact that it had, like, Latin and, like, a wacky symbol on it.
Yeah.
Like, to me, like, I understand that symbol is, like, on the book that we see what Tranta has or whatever. Like, and there's probably going to be some scientific explanations, and it has to do with the power plant there and blah, blah, blah. But, like, it was a little, even though it was cool, it was also a little goofy.
Yeah. Maybe it's that I have a touch of claustrophobia, but there was a lot of Jonas crawling through tunnels in this episode. And I'm just kind of ready for him to have like more character moments. We had a good amount of that, in the previous episode,
Yeah.
but that, and that came at the right time because I was already like, Jonas is isolated. It makes sense. Mental illness is isolating. The loss of a parent is isolating. If the stranger is him, he's still kind of isolated.
Yeah.
Like all of that stuff. It makes sense, but it can also be tough to watch, repeatedly.
Well, I'm also fascinated, as presumably he'll interact with Mikkel next episode. And it's like, how much does he tell Mikkel? And also, now we're finally getting into the realm of, are they going to start explaining the rules of time travel on the show? Because it was one thing when it was like, okay, Mikkel's the one in the past and he just stayed there. And so it's like, what happened. He was always supposed to go back there. He was always supposed to become, Jonas's dad. But now Jonas coming back and knowing that he's going to become his dad, how does that create any sort of, like, what? Yeah, I'm just interested to see what the rules are going to be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see.
All right, so that basically covers it for the recap. There are a few things we didn't touch on that we will now that we're going into the points of interest.
Wow. So many points. Actually, just 3. So we didn't really talk about Magnus in the recap. When he finally gets his freedom from the house,
he does the same thing he's been doing every week.
He goes into the woods and he goes to Franziska's like money box. He finds that it's empty.
Yeah, her
and
money box, you know what I'm saying?
Well, kind of related to our
Yes.
point. He looks around, he finds a mattress. It's surrounded by condoms, and then he finds a little bit of jewelry.
Okay, so to me, the implication here is that it's Franziska's jewelry. Franziska's having sex. Franziska is a sex worker because her money is right by a mattress with a condom. That's at least the implication. She didn't really say how exactly she was getting her money. She kind of like let him imply himself into thinking things.
Yeah.
That's the implication I'm getting. I have to say, I'm not happy that once again Magnus is looking at her money box.
Yeah.
I like, this is what, like the 4th time he's like accused her of something or followed her somewhere, or like
That's his character.
I thought after they had sex and he had confronted her and they shared a moment, he would stop doing stuff like this.
Yeah.
So I don't know. To me, that was a weird choice.
Yeah. I'm wondering, the thing that to me kind of lends credence to your theory is the fact that Franziska's dad, Peter, was going to a sex worker and that maybe Franziska like maybe went and confronted that sex worker and was like, I hate this place. I hate this town. And that person was like, oh, here, this will buy you your freedom. Like you can go wherever, do whatever, just make that money and get out.
Yeah.
So maybe.
Yeah. Interesting.
It does seem like the kind of small town, though, where
people would know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like people talk.
Yeah.
So I feel like a teen sex worker would like everyone would know very quickly.
You would think.
Yeah. Especially with her mom being a cop.
Maybe she wears a mask.
Anyway, the next point is Alexander taking Regina's last name. So,
Which we thought was interesting.
Yeah, it's just kind of uncommon. That's not like a German thing.
Well, and also we know he said early on that he came here 33 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if he's Jonas. I'm not like, yeah, this is my theory, but like, there are some threads that
Mm-hmm.
would make sense as far as, hey, I just magically appeared without a last name 33 years ago. He'd be about the right age, right?
They just look nothing alike, though.
They don't look enough alike, so it's probably not real. But I'm just saying, like, I could see Jonas meeting young Regina and connecting with her. They both have like emotional issues and stuff.
Yeah. I'm not saying that this isn't someone else.
Yeah.
Just one thing we haven't really talked about, but I want to save it more for the third point, is the fact that Jonas saw several diverging paths.
Yeah.
So, and we did it way back in episode 1 see like the the current grandparent generation as teens and kids themselves.
Yeah.
So I still feel like we have that unexplored arm of not necessarily always going backwards to the 80s, but also maybe people from the 50s going forward into the 80s.
Yeah. And we also have the possibility of people from even more in the future coming back to the 80s as opposed to just coming back to the 2000s.
Or maybe he just had a shady life.
Maybe.
Maybe. The last point kind of connected is Tronte and Peter like sitting there observing and waiting for the power outage. And they have a little notebook of times and dates of when these surges, power outages happen. And that seems to indicate that they know when people are
time traveling.
Yeah.
They very specifically are waiting for it to happen.
Exactly.
So that's fascinating. Their book has the same symbol as the symbol on the stone.
Door and on the
Also, it's interesting you bring up Helge because I'm wondering if originally it was Helge and Tronte.
That's what I'm wondering too.
And then Peter.
So that was my initial thought, but actually I'm wondering if it was Claudia and Helge, and that actually when Claudia was dying, she told Tronte, and then Tronte took it on from her. And when Helge was starting to maybe lose his mind to dementia, that's when he told Peter. And so therefore, like, they're both the inheritors. But it kind of would make sense if it was Helge and Claudia, considering Helge like gave Claudia that book.
Yeah.
So
interesting stuff going on.
It would be interesting if it was like stemming back from that.
I feel like they know some stuff, but they don't have all the pieces.
I don't think they know who is taking the kids. Otherwise, wouldn't, unless they know they can't stop them or shouldn't stop them. Like it's very interesting. We haven't learned the rules yet of like what was meant to be or things like that.
What will be, will be. So, obviously there's this Latin title. The problem with this podcast being people who've never seen the show before, we can't really do research.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a phrase that is like from something else or if it's made for the show. To me, it like sort of denotes creation, like God, created the world or whatever. If people have like, tidbits they can tell us without spoiling.
Non-spoilery hints.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm wondering if it's one of those things where like this parallel worlds, this intertwining, spot was there from the beginning of time. And therefore, like, as the world was created, so such was this. But then why would someone put a door? Like, someone had to discover it. I don't think the door was like mystical. I think it was man-made.
Yeah.
So
it's just somehow they're doing something to like, they must be doing something to like channel the energy or something. I always thought whenever we saw people going in and out of the cave before, I thought there was a part in the cave where you would go through a door and you'd be in like a machine or a lab or something. And that is where people were actually going. Like it's a hidden place within the caves.
Yeah.
But
I wonder what will happen when he tries to crawl back. Will there then be a path that is, 2019 and then, whatever.
Well, and also,
I
mean, in theory, what do you do if you're Jonas? Do you try to bring Mikkel back to his parents?
Then you won't exist.
Then you don't exist. Yeah.
And then you can't bring Mikkel back.
Or
but
maybe
then Mikkel
you do
would
exist
never be...
because I don't know how the rules of the time travel work in this thing. So,
we don't know.
Yeah.
We will see.
All right, so why don't we transition into feedback?
Yes. All right, our first bit of feedback comes from Jay via our podcast feedback@gmail.com.
At gmail.com.
If you want to send us feedback,
you can do it there.
Or leave us a comment on YouTube.
Yeah.
Rate, review the podcast, like the videos. You guys know the drill. Anyway, I have to say that 106 was my favorite episode of the whole show. We get great character-driven moments as the plot starts to unfold. All that repressed emotion boiling over into anger and violence and grief, and I was blown away by Marta's performance at the play. I binged first time round and fried my brain. So one episode at a time is great for delving more deeply into the mythology. There is so much going on. How appropriate for Ariadne/Marta to be relating her tale while Theseus/Jonas is following the red string in the labyrinth. I hadn't even considered that.
Really?
I'm really stupid sometimes.
I was kind of holding off on some of the talking about this stuff because I knew we had this email coming up.
Jay, you can take the credit, at least from me, because I'm dumb.
No.
At least when it comes to Greek mythology. Check out our Percy Jackson podcast. I can now see how Ariadne's thread is used as the actual and symbolic way characters explore and find their way through their own labyrinths. It continues to be an important motif along with the Ouroboros signifying the endless return to the start. Keep an eye on the red/yellow motifs and the introduction of the book. It all gets weirder.
So we've heard.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we've been keeping an eye on the color story as well.
As much as we can, not understanding it.
Right.
Yeah.
Without having seen the show before.
Yep.
Mike Miller via YouTube writes, about the Doppler family name. The obvious thing that springs to mind is the acoustic Doppler effect. But I think the makers of Dark even went one level above that. In nuclear reactors, the Doppler effect leads to a so-called Doppler broadening. This is a passive safety mechanism, which, in the case of a rising temperature inside of the reactor, reduces the reactivity. In the Soviet RMBK-type reactors, of which Chernobyl was one, they did not make use of the Doppler broadening safety mechanism due to the more cost-effective way it was constructed. In 1986, during the fateful reactor test in Chernobyl, this missing Doppler broadening resulted in a positive feedback loop, which contributed to the maximum credible accident. On a totally different note, I have an idea for your TV screen in the back of your videos. Show some stills from the episode on it. Netflix should give you no trouble about that, and it would spice up the visuals a bit. Yeah, Dan, let's get spicy.
Let's get spicy. Yeah, I know. I think that was a great suggestion. We're obviously not doing it this week, but when we come back, we just might.
In January.
At least for the points of interest, I think having a visual for each of the points of interest, I think might be kind of a fun time.
Yeah. We'll be like, here's the point. It's interesting. Here's another point. It's also interesting.
Or you better believe it.
This week, it would have been, here's a mattress and a condom right next to it.
And then we use the silly YouTube thing of the red circle and the arrow.
That thing and explained, it's a condom. This is how you safely use a condom. Whoever's been on this mattress has been practicing safe sex. Anyway, sorry. Thank you about the Doppler effect explanation in the reactors.
Yeah,
that's what we actually should have focused on.
That's a really cool thing I would not have known. So thank you for that tidbit.
Yeah. So definitely interesting as well with Helge and, working for the power plant and his, relationship to that as well. Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening/watching the podcast this week. We will be back in January, and I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season, no matter what holiday you partake in.
Or when in time you are.
Yes, whether you're in the 80s or not. Anyways, we will see you in the future.